So welcome back to another Emerald Dream card review. Today it's all about Rogue and it's all about Shadow Step. We got like a little kind of Shadow Step package encouraging you to bounce stuff back to hand. We've also actually kind of got a new Shadow Step and some cards that want to be bounced a lot. Like this legendary, for instance, Renferal the Malignant. This is a 3-mana 3/3 beast. Battlecry trap. One random card in your opponent's hand for a turn. I think that means basically like it's locked out of being played. And then that is improved for each time you've played this, which, you know, it's a legendary. Normally you're going to be playing this once unless you bounce it back and replay it. And then, you know, you trap 2 cards and 3 cards. And theoretically, you know, you could trap out your opponent's entire hand. If they have like a 5 or 6 card hand, you know, you might lock it all out. They could basically only play their top deck, and maybe that gives you a little bit of a window to kind of win the game because, you know, they can't remove your stuff, can't deal with anything, playing some bad top decked card, and, you know, maybe you've built out a board. Now, you know, a normal kind of bounce package or just Shadow Step is not enough to get you to that stage. So we are going to get some other cards that sort of synergize here. This is Web of Deception, 2-mana spell, return a friendly minion to your hand to summon a 4/4 spider with stealth. So of course this is a way to bounce something back to hand. The Twisted Web Weaver is kind of a payoff for replaying stuff. Whenever you play another minion you've already played, draw a card, so kind of double down on the rewards. Then the Harbinger of the Blighted, whenever this enters your hand from the battlefield, summon 2 random 2-cost minions. Now interestingly, this one actually competes with your other one because this also, of course, wants to be returned to hand, which means it's going to be kind of eating up your Shadow Steps. And I would argue I just like this one a lot better because this one gives me tempo and pressure in combination with the Web of Deception, which also gives you, you know, some tempo. So this little 3-card package, Web of Deception, Twisted Web Weaver, and Harbinger of the Blighted, this is kind of intriguing to me, right? Like this allows you to leverage Shadow Steps into some cool onboard stats and pressure. Renferal the Malignant, although technically synergistic with these, I think I'd much rather not have to keep replaying this. You know, it's a 3-mana commitment up front. It doesn't really do anything probably the first few times you play it. Like trapping a random card is so unlikely to hit something that's relevant or that's really all that disruptive to your opponent. So you have to commit this like entire game plan to actually making a big impact, and then it's just an impact for a single turn, right? And you kind of have to make sure you're set up to win the game. But how are you winning the game after doing all this? Because you've spent all your time and resources and mana setting up for this one turn that's, you know, you still got to do other things with it as well. Are you going to have the resources in hand? How is all of that going to come together from a deck building standpoint? Boy, that sounds really, really challenging to me. And I you know, it's just, if this started at like 2 or 3, you'd be like, okay, man, it doesn't take as much work to get it to a really impactful place. But I think starting at 1, it just takes a lot to get it there. And like, yes, of course, with cards like Shadow Step, you know, subsequent versions only cost 1, but you can Shadow Step other things, and that's a huge opportunity cost to overcome. Like, wouldn't I rather Shadow Step something with some insane game impacting immediate battle cries as opposed to one that takes like, you know, 3, 4, 5 times or whatever to really start to make that impact? So I don't know, man. There's also, you know, we've still got Sonia in the mix as well for Rogue. Real quick, just a review on Sonia, although I'm sure you've seen her 8 million times like everybody. So, you know, you can get extra copies of Renferal, like with a Shadow Step, push this down to 1, of course, play it with Sonia, get another copy that costs 0. There might be some loops here that kind of get there, but man, it's even more commitment to mana and time and like later in the game and like, I don't know, man. I'm just still not convinced the payoff here is actually worth all the juice is worth the squeeze, as they say, because this has a lot of squeeze as far as I'm concerned. So like, does that mean this is a card you can just toss in and play once and be happy with it sometimes? I don't even think so, right? Like, I think the payoff here is so bad with one random card, so unlikely to be good. You really have to lean into this, which that might exclude it from getting any play, because if it's not good enough to define the entire deck, like, you're probably just better off running other targets to Shadow Step and bounce. So I don't really see it for Renferal the Malignant personally. There's always that chance of, you know, obscenely evil Sonia chains and crazy rogue stuff that becomes oppressive. So it's got that opportunity for sure. It's just so much commitment. All right, so moving on to Web of Deception. This is a pretty neat little card. 2-mana spell. Return a friendly minion to your hand to summon a 4/4 spider with stealth. And yeah, this actually feels like a pretty good return on the 2-mana investment here. You know, of course, Shadow Step is 0 and it discounts 2. So Shadow Step is like, you know, an enormous mana advantage over this, arguably like 4 mana cheaper. But, you know, Shadow Step is historically one of the best cards in Rogue. It's absolutely amazing. Not everything has to compete 1-to-1 with Shadow Step. And, you know, the 4/4 with stealth is a nice little makeup concession to get it closer. You know, that's going to be very awkward to deal with. Can push some extra face damage as needed. Of course, can take some value trades fairly well into even the mid game. And you're still getting a bounce, which the bounce is ultimately the valuable part here, probably playing something again, getting another nice battle cry, getting more resources, whatever you need out of it. Web of Deception can do that. So a little, you know, more prohibitively expensive compared to Shadow Step, but still ultimately a cheap card with a good payoff baked into it with the stealth spider. So I think, you know, could this be great in a bounce deck? Yes, we've talked about these other two cards already, look pretty good for this. And also maybe just generically good as well. I mean, just a solid way to get something good back into your hand with some reward for it too. Moving on to the Twisted Webweaver. This guy looks crazy. Got like a smoking face on his butt. He's a 1-mana 1/3 beast. Whenever you play another minion you've already played, draw a card. And man, this is some really cheap card draw, and I think could create some pretty crazy like miracle style turns, because this is only one. It's really easy to toss into a turn, play this down, you know, play the Harbinger of the Blighted down like we saw, bounce the Harbinger of the Blighted, replay it. You're already drawing some cards. You're hoping to find more Shadow Steps, more bounces. You know, you might be able to draw 4 or 5 plus cards in a single turn if you go for a crazy chain. Now, of course, you know, you got some board size problems with this card in particular that become a little bit of an issue if you're bouncing this one, but I don't even really know if this is your target. I think just other good cards, once again, can be your target. Just other good battle cries, you know, whatever things you want to run. And getting, you know, to the second, the third, the fourth copy to draw 3 cards at only a 1-mana overhead, it's a pretty good rate of return. Again, it's all about commitment, because, you know, you have to find that window and like really lean into one thing. And I could imagine some rogue decks kind of building themselves out. So, you know, it's like, okay, I have a tempo option. I have kind of a control option. I have like a value option, you know, a few different cards I'm happy to commit to for my bounces, and like use the Twisted Webweaver whenever I go for that big commitment as a way to refuel and be sure I have enough, you know, stuff to keep going with more bounces and future iterations. Also, just keep in mind, you know, non-legendary cards, the second copy is just going to be, you know, a way to activate this. Even just 1-mana draw 1 wouldn't be a disaster in some cases and could kick off, you know, a little chain itself. So this looks pretty reasonably strong to me. Just a lot of high potential output for it. Again, with commitment, but Rogue is good at that as long as the payoff is worth it. I just didn't think the legendary was worth it. The rest of this looks more solid to me. Then we've got Harbinger of the Blighted here. This is a 2-mana 2/3. Whenever this enters your hand from the battlefield, summon 2 random 2-cost minions. So this is a little bit of a tempo way again to utilize your Shadow Steps. You play this down. Maybe you take a nice little value trade with it before you bounce it. If it's, you know, if you're willing to leave it out there for a turn, may or may not be willing to do that, but could clean up a 2/2, bounce it back to hand, get a couple random 2-cost minions so that you don't give up a ton of tempo. So that's, I think, solid enough. I actually like that better than the legendary. I think, you know, just getting stuff on board can be oppressive. Random 2-drops, you know, kind of shaky. Sometimes there's really bad stuff like little like Murlocs that have like 1 health for no reason, or synergies you can't utilize and stuff. So you can't use this super reliably. And of course, you don't go off on this like crazy because you feel your board out too fast. But it might be a decent stopgap from time to time to make sure you don't fall too far behind, while maybe, you know, activating our card draw guy we just saw. But I think realistically, again, I think this gets cut for just better cards, you know, awesome battle cries. Maybe not even from this set, but just good rogue cards, good neutral cards, whatever it is. Things that you're just happy to, you know, like we saw like Xavius, right? The new legendary, like neutral legendary, discover a card from your deck. with the dark gift. Like, that's a really cool bounce target. You know, that could be something playing over and over again could be crazy. Maybe a little expensive, but you get the idea. Various like combo cards for rogue, setting up with Sonias. There's so many things I actually see better as bounce targets than the two payoffs here. So, you know, my rank order is basically other cards not mentioned here, then Harbinger, then Renferal, as far as things I want to bounce. So realistically, I like the two kind of enablers here, the Twisted Webweaver and the Web of Deception, quite a bit. I don't really love these payoff cards quite as much. All right, so moving on to the rest of these rogue cards. This is more kind of disruption stuff. Like Renferal almost feels like a merging of these two sides. And these cards are also reasonable bounce targets, although, again, I think they're going to be pretty bad on my rank ordered list. This is the Shadow Cloaked Assailant, a 4-mana 3/5 demon. Battle cry: if you're holding one of the same cards as your opponent, shuffle theirs into their deck. So, you know, that could work with rogue cards if you're facing rogue, or neutral cards if you both have, you know, a neutral that's very commonly played and seen. Everybody's running some big Ziliax, right? And you can shuffle their Ziliax into their deck. Or we're going to see some additional cards here that are ways to generate stuff from your opponent's deck. Remember, first off, we saw Ashamain previously, the Wild God. This fills your hand with copies of cards from your opponent's deck. So, you know, you can play Ashamain, wait a turn, play the Shadow Cloaked Assailant to shuffle theirs into their deck. And the way this is worded with theirs, I think the condition here is singular. They just have to have one card for this to work, and then the payoff is multiples. Like, if you have 5 of the same cards in your hand as they do, I think all 5 would get shuffled into their deck based on the theirs. So there's Ashamain. There's also going to be the Tricky Satyr. Get a copy of the lowest cost card in your opponent's hand. So another way to get a card from their hand. And then there's going to be Mimicry. Your opponent draws 2 cards. You get copies of them. So another way for you to get their cards. This is kind of weird because you would make them draw them and then shuffle them right back in. You'd be kind of right back where you started. I mean, you'd have some copies, I guess, which is fine, but not that exciting. And then finally, there's Nightmare Fuel. Discover a copy of a minion in your opponent's deck, combo with a dark gift. So all of these do give you ways to get stuff from your opponent, this kind of thief style package. And then the Shadow Cloaked Assailant is a way to, you know, take any of theirs and put them back in deck, kind of, you know, forcing them to redraw that, reducing their card advantage potentially dramatically. Which is kind of cool. Again, I will say, you know, a lot of work has to go into this. You're playing a lot of cards in this entire little package of stuff just to potentially disrupt your opponent. How long is it taking to do that? Have they already won the game? If they've just built a monster board while you're trying to do all this, you need to shuffle stuff from board into deck, or you're going to die potentially, right? The hand is threatening, but not as threatening as the board. So some concerns there. There's also just, you know, like timing windows on some of this. You know, like you play these cards like on curve. You know, you play the 3-drop Tricky Satyr on 3, hoping to hit the, you know, Shadow Cloaked Assailant on 4 or whatever. They may have already played that card, particularly because it was the lowest cost card from the Tricky Satyr. So, you know, you won't always have to play these on curve necessarily, but it's just little things like that do become a problem. Like, are they going to play the cards? One of the cards just literally gives them the cards and then takes them back away. And it's like, well, that didn't really feel worth the trouble either. So I just think ultimately, you know, what's the average result of this? How many cards is it shuffling into their deck? And how valuable is that going to be? Like, does it really disrupt them? Or are they able to keep playing the game fairly successfully? Maybe like 2 to 3 cards on average, and that's with some work. It's possible for it to get bigger. It's also possible that it just whiffs altogether, you know, if you don't hit the stuff or they play it out early. So it just feels like, again, a little clunky, a little unrewarding, I guess, for all the work that I'm putting into it, which I know this feels like a theme, this video, but it's just what the cards are telling me, right? It's what the cards are saying. So I don't know, man. And this is too, like, not really a bounce target, because it's like, well, I already did the thing. It's, you know, I could save it for a future turn and maybe reload and try it all again, but kind of right back where we started. And they do eventually get the cards anyway. You know, it's just shuffling to the deck, which is often enough disruption to be very worth it. But if you don't have a real win condition and you don't push towards the end game, those threats and those problems are going to come back eventually, right? So you have to still win the game and create outs for yourself, which I don't know if this does that all that well. It's still not really setting up for the victory necessarily. So all in all, just not really in love with the Shadow Cloaked Assailant here as a reward once again for all of these other cards. So talking about the tricky satyr, like independently, this is a 3-mana 4/3 demon. Battlecry, get a copy of the lowest cost card in your opponent's hand. Don't really love this. Like, you know, the card they have for them is obviously, as always, going to be better for them than it is for you. It's, you know, it's their deck, their synergies, their game plans. You're not going to be able to utilize it as well as them. Sometimes you may not be able to utilize it literally at all. If it's like, you know, oh, this affects arcane spells. And it's like, well, God, I don't have any arcane spells. This card's completely useless to me. So some matchups, it's just going to totally whiff and feel like garbage. So, you know, you're kind of generating all these resources, but often very hard to use. As far as like thief support for rogue, we know historically, like, it's just really hard to make thief stuff good unless you print like exactly a null that is completely busted when you add cards to hand. You know, there are still some thief style cards in standard, but not really the ones that we're that excited about. These haven't really gotten there in the past, and I don't really see this package changing that very effectively either. So you know, it's fine, it's okay, it's a 4/3 for 3, it does something, but it's just not gonna push any new decks forward, I don't think, at this level. And then we have Mimicry here. 1-mana spell, your opponent draws 2 cards, you get copies of them. So at a face value level, this card's really bad, right? You're giving your opponent 2 cards they put in their deck and they love, and you're getting 2 cards that are just completely random garbage for you. Very unlikely, again, to actually be useful or synergistic for you comparatively to the opponent. So you would like never play this unless you were going to, you know, manipulate them somehow via thievery stuff, or, you know, the Shadow Cloaked Assailant, kind of, but even this one doesn't really make sense with Mimicry. Just kind of right back where you started. I guess, again, you get 2 copies of bad cards on average. So not really worth it. There is, you know, a mill angle for this, where the goal is to like fill up the opponent's hand or just burn them out of cards into fatigue. We don't see really any other support for that right now. Even like Sonia doesn't work with spells anymore. Like that could have been a cool play, like Mimicry Sonia stuff maybe. So I don't really see a mill package coming together. It's definitely something to keep an eye on in the future. Not generally the most reliable game plan or something that's really top of the meta level. Blizzard probably wants to avoid that, frankly, but it's a possibility at least, but I think an unlikely one, and I just don't really like this card otherwise. So then finally here we have Nightmare Fuel, which I think this is the most just like generically solid card out of this entire rogue package. It's a 1-mana spell. Discover a copy of a minion in your opponent's deck. Combo with a Dark Gift. I forgot to put up the Dark Gift graphic here, but hopefully you guys know all the options there. Lots of good stuff to do. This one's much better than all the rest, right? Because finally you're getting your opponent's cards, but you get to pick which one you want out of 3 options. So, you know, you're able to pick one that's more useful for you or the game moment or whatever it is, right? The Discover helps a lot here to improve the quality of this card, as does the Dark Gift. So in both cases, you're finally getting something that you can actually use. Maybe take an awesome ceaseless from your opponent, you know, take a cool big legendary, a wild god that's good, whatever it is, right? Finally, you get some choices. Maybe even just maybe just an average card, but with a Dark Gift that's rewarding in some way, right? So ultimately, this looks good. I think this could just go in a lot of different rogue decks. Nice little combo activator, and, you know, combo itself. Cheap spells rogues love. So this is a solid, good rogue card amongst a lot of other cards that I'm having trouble finding a home for. So all that said, let's go ahead and rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Renferal the Malignant is a 2-star card. Web of Deception is a 4-star card. Twisted Webweaver is a 4-star card. Harbinger of the Blighted is a 3-star card. Shadow Cloaked Assailant is a 2-star card. Tricky Satyr is a 3-star card. Mimicry is a 2-star card. Nightmare Fuel is a 4-star card. And yeah, there you go. That's the rogue set. Oh, we didn't recover that weapon from last time, the Barbed Thorn. I mean, we already talked about how bad this looks, and this that fits in no way at all with the other cards in the set either. It is absolutely standalone and very bad, I think. So yeah, I mean, I don't usually identify a lot with rogue cards, to be fair, but this set it looks kind of fun. Like the disruption's fun in some ways. Ashbane actually looks very cool and fun to me. But a lot of these cards just look clunky. I don't know. Maybe I'm having trouble finding the vision for Rogue. Maybe they really can commit to such crazy Renferals that it's worth it. I just feel like the rest of the decks in the meta are going to just be killing you while you just like play a bunch of these. And probably you still just die. So anyway, share your thoughts on these cards down below. Thanks much as always for watching. And until next time, game on.